Hello everybody, welcome back to the Nocturnal Gaming Network. My name is Xeriua, and today we are playing Spaceflight Simulator. So today we are going to be working with one of my subscribers, a fellow YouTuber. His name's Young Aviator Dave. All of his information will be down in the description. And he's just getting into this game. And yeah, so he's been talking with me about some of his rockets and stuff, and he wants to send a rover to the moon, and this is going to be his first moon mission that he's ever done. So he sent me some pictures of his rover and some pictures of his rocket, and we're actually going to go over this, and we're going to do a little critique of the rockets, so I can try to explain some stuff to him that I think it was a little bit hard to convey through text. So what I've done is I've recreated his original rover here to the moon. Remember, this is his first ever rover moon mission, so, well, I would say it's not the best rover, but this is the time to learn right here. So, looking at this thing, the biggest thing that I notice, first off, that's going to cause trouble is it's not balanced. Okay, so on the moon, gravity is low compared to Earth. I don't know the exact number because I don't have that good of a memory. I looked it up before the video, but I've forgotten what it was. I'm sorry. If I can remember, I will put the gravity number on the screen for the moon as compared to the 9.8 meters per second on Earth, on the planet here, the actual planet, as well as in the game. So I mean, it is consistent. So the rover isn't balanced, and basically what's going to happen is when you use your wheels to get, to drive, since you're not balanced, the first thing that's going to happen is the rocket's just going to flip over. I keep saying rocket. The rover's going to want to flip. It's going to want to turn. And also your wheels are really close together, and that's not going to help you very much with the rocket wanting to turn either. So I would recommend, to balance this, we put a second, what am I looking for here? Command module, crew capsule on the other end. And that just takes this rocket, rover, and it evens it out. And then we're going to take the wheels, and we're going to try and get as wide of a wheelbase as we can on this. So something like this. Another thing you could do is you could grab, not that one. That one's not quite right. Grab something like this, maybe. And how do we want to do this? Because what we could do is put some big wheels on it. Make it a big wheel, something like this, and that would further increase your wheelbase, but you've still got the wheels in the middle because the moon is a very uneven surface. So if you just have the two big wheels on the end like that with the low ground clearance, you actually risk like stranding yourself up on something, especially where you don't really have any means of actually getting yourself airborne. So I think what I would personally do is I'd spread the wheels out like this using the small wheels, and then I'd put some RCS thrusters on either end of it. Something like this. That way you've got the wheels, they can be your primary mode of transportation here, but say you do something, you're driving down a hill and you try to stop and your rover flips over, right? How are you going to get it upright again? Well, if you don't have any type of thruster, RCS or otherwise, you really can't do too much other than rock it back and forth and hope you can get enough momentum with the reaction wheels to flip it back over. So I would put RCS thrusters on this. Now, because the gravity on the moon is so low, these RCS thrusters, just one on each end, are probably going to be enough to lift it up and carry it for short distances. And when you're putting the RCS thrusters on, you just want to make sure that you're distributing them evenly so that there's RCS thrusters facing in each direction. And pay attention to which direction the nozzles are going. So currently we have, well, technically we'd be flipped sideways, so the wheels are on the ground, so we'd have one nozzle going left, one nozzle going right, and then two up and two down, and that should be enough to have the two nozzles lift us if, assuming those are primarily going to be facing towards the ground, and the, side to side are just going to be maneuvering thrusters. Now, that's it for the body. Next, let's talk about the system on this. So, wheels are electric, right? So currently we need some method of fueling, generating electricity, right? He's got these solar panels here. Now, the same thing that I previously mentioned, they aren't balanced. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, say, move these a little bit. Something like this. And now you've got nice balanced solar panels. And what you could do is you could put another one here, something like this, or what I'd probably suggest is getting a battery, getting a big battery, something like this right here, okay? And you don't have to have the other solar panel. You could use it or not. You could put a couple batteries, or you could put, I think you've got enough room here for actually two of these if you wanted. So you could do something like stack up these batteries here. Put like three of these things. This will also give it more mass. So when it weighs more, when it has more mass, gravity will pull down on it and actually keep it on the ground more. So it might be in your best interest to have a little more weight on this thing, right? Something like this. And I mean, that's basically my little suggestion for your rocket here, your rover here. Now, the thing I don't know is when you add all the batteries on it, if that's going to still have enough thrust with these two RCS modules. In this case, it may not, but I'd still have them. You could, I'm sure, find something to do with them. The other thing you could also do is, say, get rid of these sideways panels and maybe get rid of those, make it two batteries, do something like this, right? That will slim it down and actually get your center of gravity lower, and then you could take and put two more RCS thrusters on it. Something like this, and I guarantee, like almost 100%, that this one will have enough thrust to get yourself up. So, you weigh 34 tons. It's not that much. The RCS thruster may not have a very strong thrust, but remember, the gravity on the moon is so much lower that it might not matter. Also, while we're on this specific topic, you could go here and you could add some electric thrusters. And this might be close because these things also have very, very low thrust. But they might also be able to lift your rover up on the moon. So, basic rover. Those are my thoughts on the rover. Now, let's clear this and let's move on to the rocket. Bam. So here we are, the rocket. Now, we did talk via Twitter, actually, on the rocket and on the rover. So he's gone through and he's made some of the changes that I suggested. I forgot when I was remaking this to add the wheels back to it, so let's put those on there right now. So something like this. And we have 2 batteries, so we'll have something to actually go through and, you know, give us the electricity to drive this. Because if we don't use the batteries, basically the wheels are only going to run for like, let's say 10 seconds maybe, before you're out of power. So you're going to have to constantly be raising and lowering your solar panels, because basically you don't want to drive with the solar panels out because it changes your center of gravity and whatnot. So yeah, you're going to be constantly charging yourself up and closing the solar panels and whatnot. So if you have the batteries, what you can do is you can charge the batteries, just let this thing sit there while you go launch another rocket or do whatever. Just, you know, leave the app sitting for a couple minutes. It'll charge the batteries back up, close the solar panels, and you're good to go for, you know, a minute or two, something like that. And actually, he's got the big 6 square battery here. When I do rovers, I usually use the 2 or the 4 square batteries. So, I mean, he's got much more power in this rover than I've usually got in mine. But then at the same time, my rovers are usually smaller. So it all balances itself out relatively. Now, the rocket itself, one of the big things I'm seeing here is you have way too many stages here. So you also have just too much mass in general for this rocket. Basically, currently, when I develop my rockets that I'm using for stuff, I have a spreadsheet that I use to calculate delta V, how much thrust you're going to have in your rockets. I also have a little bit of experience, so I can guess about how much fuel I'm going to need. And basically, I use my thrust to weight and my mass to actually calculate what I'm going to need. So this rocket has way too many thrusters, way too much fuel, and it's just too big with too many stages. So basically what's going to happen here is, and this is actually called, I believe, the rocket paradox here, where, you know, to get this piece off the ground, you need X amount of thrust, right? So you add the thruster, but then to get that off the ground, you need even more thrust. And then to get that off, you need even more thrust. So as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you require exponentially more power to get yourself off the ground, because not only are you lifting this little teeny module up top, you're lifting all of the rest of this. So if possible, it's better to use more efficient thrusters and use less of them, to use less fuel. All right, so basically this rocket has way too much fuel. We could actually do a launch. Well, you know what? We should actually probably do that. Instead of me just talking about it, we'll actually launch this thing and we'll send it to the moon, and we'll see what we can do with it. But let's go into a couple of other issues here. So this little tiny module that he's got here to cap off the boosters, your separator is down here, right? So since the separator's down here, there's not too much you can do with this little rocket if we want to be like 100% realistic here. So this should not happen where you've got something above, another stage above your separating stage from the main rocket on the booster. As far as the boosters go, in general, I don't do multi-stage boosters, and this is my opinion. I think you should build your rocket, and the rocket itself should be contained enough to get your ship up into space. And then what you're going to use the boosters for is you're going to add these boosters to just get yourself up the little bit in the atmosphere. So say use boosters to get yourself up to like 15 kilometers, you know, halfway to orbit, and then the rest of your ship should be able to do the rest. So what I'll do is I'll have, you know, I'll have my payload. Usually I've got some sort of stage to maneuver the payload in orbit. Then I'll have a second/third stage, and then I'll have a big primary stage. And the primary stage is going to be used to get myself to orbit, okay? Just get myself up into space. The secondary stage is going to be used to circularize and potentially start burning towards whatever my target is. If I have a third stage, it's going to be to get myself to the target and then either fully or partially circularize myself around the target. And then from there I've got the landing stage and whatnot. So your boosters, they're very big. They're sort of unnecessarily so big. And another thing that's going to happen here where you've got your stages broken like this, when you're in atmosphere and you're like, say, I don't know how high we're going to get with this, maybe 10 kilometers right here, when we actually have to separate this first stage down at the bottom, first off, you're going to run out of run out of fuel in the center stage right here before you do in your boosters. So you're going to want to separate this stage as soon as it's out of fuel. When you do that, and these, you know, drop down, right, and they go down here like this, you run the risk of these actually coming off and smashing into your boosters, either blowing up the entire rocket or just clipping part of the booster and breaking it. You also have that same issue up here where, again, since it's staggered, when these come off, if you're going at 60 degrees, gravity's pulling these things down like this way, okay? So even if you separate these when, you know, these boosters over here are actually going, which I don't like doing. I like to separate my stages from stop. That way they boost gently back, and then I can hit my thrust back on and just shoot away from them, rather than this thruster, this stage that I'm dropping is actually going forward with me, you know, while I'm separating it. I separate it, it slowly coasts away, and then, you know, the main rocket goes away and the booster just sort of stays. But that's me. So, well, where was I? Oh yeah, where you're sideways like this, you run the risk of these boosters coming off and smashing into your engines over here. When you actually get up to this stage, again, these top rockets aren't doing too much. They aren't really going to be, like, used logically, because the only way you can fire them is if you haven't separated them from the rocket. So, you know, whatever. I don't recommend that. It's not very realistic, but you can do whatever you want. So the next part is this stage. I really do like how you've got the staggered fuel tanks here, where you've got two thrusters and then you've got the extra tank here. And this is good for a couple reasons. One, it shares fuel between all three of these stacks. So this one, and then, you know, this one up here. It shares fuel between all three of these and makes them effectively one fuel tank. So that's good, and it'll make sure that these two thrusters down here are always equally fueled, and you don't ever have to worry about one running out before the other. Okay, so that's really good. I've used that on a couple of my rockets. The one that's specifically coming to mind right now is the Mars lander that we did. That we put the seismic sensors on all of the two moons and the planet itself. Just using the two regular fuel tanks on that wasn't enough to actually make the landing on Mars if I wasn't extremely careful, and it sort of made it so precise it wasn't worth doing. So I went and added another fuel tank right to the top, and that shared my fuel as well as giving me just that little bit more that I needed. So then we go up here, and basically from this point on, you should be in space at this point. Like right about here, you should be in space. So you no longer want the big, expensive, how do I want to say this, hungry rockets, right? You want something like this, something that's more energy efficient, that has maybe a lower thrust to weight ratio, but it's got a much better fuel consumption rate. So at this point, I'd recommend switching over to this engine. I believe it's not the Titan. What is that? What is this one? Titan, the Frontier engine. That's right. So switch over to the Frontier engine. And that way you'll get much better use out of this fuel and all of its stages. So when we go, let me put this thing back so I don't forget and it explodes. So at this point, this is what's going to be getting us to the moon, as well as what's going to be landing us on the moon, because we really don't have any method of actually, doing a nice controlled descent here. That's another thing. If we make it to the moon, I'm assuming we're going to be relying on this little tank and that great big engine to actually make landing on the moon. So that's going to be really interesting. I'm actually very interested in trying to fly this thing and see what happens. So since you should be in space, you should be using a more efficient engine. I'm assuming that this engine right here will finish circularizing us. Okay, so use that with the Frontier, and then this right here. Now I'm pretty sure. Oop, that's not what I wanted. Get back on there. Get back on there. I think we can grab one of these. See how what we've got here is basically one fuel tank, but it's split up with a couple different engines and a separator. Right, so you're losing fuel, but you're adding a lot of heavy thrust here that we don't really need. So, in my opinion here, it would be better to get rid of this section, right, and do something like this here, right here, something like that, and then once you drop this on the moon, you're going to use this separator right here to actually let go of your cargo. Then you've got this rocket that's just sort of sitting there, and now it's left on the moon's surface, and I try very hard not to leave debris in space and on the surface and whatnot unless it's something I'm going to keep. So what I'd recommend doing here is putting a control module, some sort of control module, like a probe core. That way, after you've dropped your payload on the surface of the moon, you can then take this, maybe put, there we go, maybe put 2 RCS thrusters right here at the top, okay? And what you can do is you can use the RCS thrusters to turn this thing back upright, light up that main engine, and just shoot it off into space. And then either crash it into, the moon or send it back to Earth or something like that. And now it's out of the way, and your little rover here can go about its business in either direction. But we are not going to do that. We're just going to launch this rocket as it is and see what we can do with it. I think, yeah, this was like this. Okay, so here we are, the completed rocket in all its glory, and we're going to send this thing to the moon now. So here we are. This part, like I said, is not what I would consider very realistic. what we're going to do is we're going to light these 4 engines here. Okay, and we're going to light all these, use the boosters, purely the boosters. I think that's all of them, to launch ourselves. And that should give us enough thrust to weight. Like I said, it's not really realistic because you wouldn't have thrusters burning like legit into one of your fuel tanks. That would be a very, very big recipe for disaster here. Oh, I need a thumbnail so I can make this look nice and pretty when I send it to him. Alright, so there we are. Here is the rocket of young aviator Dave in all of its glory. And yeah, let's get going here. Where is my moon? My moon is right over here. So we're going to set it as a target, and we're going to get going. We're actually in a pretty good position here. I think we're going to end up going probably about halfway around the planet, and then we can probably make an encounter with the moon like directly up above Earth or something like that. Maybe a little bit over to the right, so like right over here somewhere. But let's see what happens here. So the other thing that happens when you've done the boosters like this with them all enclosed, I like coming back to my rocket view when I launch to make sure all the boosters are working. So that's sort of hard to tell if the boosters are working, isn't it? But I do see all 4 fuel tanks. Okay, you're good. So let's follow the rocket. We've run out of fuel in the topmost portion. We have way too much thrust, and we need to actually turn ourselves over here. And, you know, this rocket isn't really made for a gravity turn, but I'm going to sort of do a little bit of a gravity turn anyway. There's our second bit of thrusters that have run out of fuel. That's the middle stage. And now the final stage has run out of fuel. Okay, so we'll turn this off. Pop our separators, 1 and 2. 1, 2. There we go. Alright, so now we're on. See how much more fuel efficient this is like this when you get rid of the boosters and you just sort of use the rocket. And actually, I was about right with my guess of the boosters getting us up to like 15 kilometers. So now we can sort of back off the thrust a little bit here, and we're going to just sort of coast until we get into space. We're going to keep ourselves turning so we can be adding sideways velocity to our rocket. Maybe 75%, because that's actually raising our apoaps, where when I was at like 60 there, it wasn't anymore. So we're out of fuel. Now we need to separate again. There we go. Turn this off. 1, 2. There we go. Alright, so again, we're moving forward. We want to increase our thrust here because we're actually gaining on the apoaps. We're doing very good on fuel here, so here we are. Now we can turn pretty well horizontal, horizontal relative to the Earth, and just continue to circularize ourselves here. I don't see the... Yeah, I didn't think I would. Okay, we're just going to go 100% thrust so we don't creep up on our apoaps. We need about 100 more meters per second in our delta V, and we will be circularized. We are almost out of fuel. Alright, so here we are. So what do we have left? We have so much fuel here. So the way I want to do this is I want to raise this area right here until it's just outside of the atmosphere. And then I'm going to preemptively turn myself, and we're going to use a burst of fuel from the rocket at periaps. Well, actually in this zone, not at periaps, to raise our apoaps towards the moon. And then we're going to go around, we're going to cut off this stage, and we're going to drop it back to the planet. So let's accelerate some time. And right about here, we probably want to be in the zone. We don't want to pre-burn any. We're going to go to 100% thrust. So right about here, there we go, in the zone, turn it on. Now, that's turned us right around. Leave just teeny tiny bit of fuel, just like that. Okay, and now we can come around this way. So right here, at apoaps, we're going to thrust. That's going to drop this. We don't quite make contact, so we're going to have to deorbit that. But that's okay. We'll go here. Oh no, I did make a mistake. We should have... Ooh, we still have our fairing too. I forgot about that. So let's litter the the area around ourselves with debris, but that's okay. All of this should fall back towards Earth. What we're going to do is we're going to face just a little bit radial, either in or out, doesn't really matter, so we can get out of this cloud of debris, and then we're just going to burn until we've raised our periaps. So just like that, and now we will preemptively rotate ourselves around. There we go. So now we should be able to accelerate through time. We have lost the debris cloud. It should crash into the planet and make itself just go away. Like, we don't even need it. It's just gone, right? There it is. All that we have left is, I don't know, a fairing or something. Let's switch to it and just deorbit it right now. What is it? It is the rocket itself. Okay, that should be more than enough to deorbit this thing. Yeah, you can't even see. There it is, see? That's deorbited properly. And we are going to go to rate just the periaps is fine. Just a little bit before the zone, because we have way more thrust than we could ever need to do this. And we're just going to raise our apoaps, and we should be able to make it to the moon, get a nice encounter, and then actually probably slow ourselves down with this tank right here. Boom. So there we are. Now, one reason I don't like having this much thrust at this stage is it's very hard to make fine maneuvers at this distance, because the further your control points are, like the further you're trying to work away from the point you're at, the more amplified the effects of your thrust are. So when we get really close to the planet like this and we're trying to control our periaps and make it a nice low periaps of, like, say 10,000 meters, it's sort of hard to control it. And you saw how I was only at like 1% thrust, but it was just moving right along. It's a little difficult. So it's better to have low thrust at this point when you're out in space, because it makes maneuvers easier, which is why I like to include RCS on all of my stuff, because you can use the RCS to fine-tune, adjust your rockets. So now we're just going to time warp to the moon, okay? And something like right here. And I'm just going to follow it because it's easier at this point. Here's the transition to the moon. Once we transition to the moon, what's our orbit going to look like after? Oh, we're actually going to leave Earth's sphere of influence. So we could sling ourselves, you know, with the moon here if we wanted. We're not going to. Our goal is to land on the moon. So we're going to preemptively turn ourselves around. So right about there, that's probably good. We can accelerate. I need to follow this thing again because I've lost the follow when I zoomed out so much and switched my spheres of influence, or switched the relative camera to the sphere of influence. That was close. one of these days I'm actually going to smash into one of my little satellites here, and it's going to be funny but sad at the same time. So here we are. We're at our periaps. We're actually just before the periaps. That's okay. I'm going to turn slightly radial out to try and raise the periaps. So something like this, and then we can boost. And there we are. We have entered Moon's sphere of influence. We can go pretty much just retrograde now. There we go. Something like this. Now, basically, I'm going to begin to deorbit this right now. So something like this right here. And this is all we need these thrusters for. I'm actually going to let go of that one, and I'm going to keep this one for a little bit now, and we are going to go back to the map, and we are going to accelerate ourselves through time here, and we are aiming for roughly 12 o'clock. Oh, but we've hit... That sort of sucks. We've hit the 5 kilometer mark, which means it's cut off our... There we go. We'll see if we can do something like this and actually gain a little bit of height here. There we go. That should allow us to better do this maneuver. Because we want to be at about 12 o'clock before we start slowing ourselves down here. So there we go. 12 o'clock's basically where the apoapse is. And what we're going to do is when we hit 12 o'clock, we're going to cancel out our sideways momentum. And we're literally going to burn retrograde, but in relation to our orbit and the planet. So we could be slightly radial in or slightly radial out depending on the inclination of our orbit. And yeah, so we are just passing 12 o'clock. So I'm going to go down to like 50% thrust because we don't need all of this thrust. And I'm going to put, there we go, put my orbital trajectory just slightly before my target. And I'm going to rotate myself something like this, and we can actually just fast forward here until we hit the 5 kilometer mark. Alright, there's the warp zone. We can't go any further down. We're going to make sure we're following our craft again. Now, basically what I like to do is I want to be around, say, 40 meters per second at like 2,000, 1,500 kilometers, not kilometers, meters, and that gives me a decent speed to descend at, but it also allows me to stop quick enough. Where we have such massive thrust, I'm actually just going to let this thing plummet right towards the Earth at like the moon at 200 something meters per second, and then, you know, once we hit like 2,000 meters off the surface, we're going to start working on slowing ourselves down. So let's go right about here. We can just sort of, you know, do our thing, cut the sideways momentum. There it is. So we're basically on target. We're down around 30. See how absolutely ridiculously quickly we just lost all of our velocity. So yeah, where's this actually going? It's gonna like go in between my ships. I don't want it to do that. So I'm going to just puff this thing, boom, go in here, drop that, turn this engine on, and we're going to work on getting ourselves into a nice encounter with the rest of my stuff right here. So let's say like right about there. Perfect. So now we can just sort of go down. Here we are back up around 40 meters per second, and we're at 1,500 meters off the surface. So we're just going to keep going towards the ground here. Follow this once again because it seems to have stopped being followed. We can burn retrograde but slightly upwards, and that should allow us to slow ourselves down here. There we go. And then we can go to the left following more retrograde to adjust the trajectory. Alright, now map. Where we're at about 500 meters, we probably want to start using the map to basically angle ourselves here, and we can just keep boosting. Maybe go to like 40% thrust here so we're not so drastically changing things about you know, our orbit. Something like this. I actually think I want to land this thing over here. So like right to the left, to the right of my other modules. So now we just basically want to go down to like 25% thrust or something like that, and we can boost our engines gently, and that'll let us hover over here. So I'm going to put it right in between that solar tower there and this module, this old module here. I can't remember. I think this one was from the rover rescue, right? We want to go to the left a little bit. Not the left, the right a little bit. Now, this is where having some RCS thrusters would be very helpful, because you could use the main thruster on like, what, 10%? Maybe even like 8%? 13% is too much, but 10% is not quite enough. But you could use the really low thrust to just keep this hovering, and then you could use your RCS thrusters to actually go through and maneuver this thing. So here we are, we've landed. Now, since we don't have RCS skin, we're going to have to do this the hard way. What I'd like to do is use RCS, lift myself up just a little bit, rotate myself in the air, and then set myself down sideways. What we're going to do is we're going to just use the reaction wheels here to sort of turn the rocket over. And then once we start falling towards the moon, so something like this. No, not quite. A little bit more. Remember how low the gravity is on the moon, so this takes a little bit. See how we're just stuck here? Oh, we actually are heading towards the moon now. And we're going to be heading towards the moon more as we get out there, because just the rotation on this craft. So right about now, what we want to do is we want to be hitting right to try and use the reaction wheels to rotate against the moon's gravity. Bam. And if we do it just right, something like this, we should be able to land this thing without any damage. So, we got this module. We're just going to get rid of that module, and we're going to use this to sort of push it over a little bit. Something like this. Something like ooh, let's... Don't hit it, don't hit it, don't hit it. Okay, good. I thought I was going to hit it. We'll push it a little further so I can get this thing mostly flat. Something like that. That's probably pretty good right there. And now I can just move away a little bit, and we can extend our solar panels. And here we are. We've landed the rocket on the moon. See how tippy this thing is with the solar panels, by the way? Yeah. I should have put RCS thrusters on this just to see if it would work. Or even also some of those electrical thrusters, the ion thrusters. But I did not. I kept true to young aviator Dave's design, and, well, it can work. What you've got can get you to the moon. Overall, not bad for a first attempt. I think it may be better than my first attempt. My first attempt was a disaster. And there was quite a few crashes into the moon itself. So, you know, if you don't quite make it the first time, don't get disheartened. It's a game. You can try again. So good job, man. And like I said, he's starting to play this game too. You might want to check him out. His stuff's in the description. And thank you all for watching. I hope my critique of the rocket, as well as the you know, just general conversation here has been interesting and hopefully helpful to people. So thank you all so much for watching. My name's Xeriua, and this is the Nocturnal Gaming Network, bringing you Spaceflight Simulator. Have yourselves a wonderful night, everybody.